European starlings are extremely recognizable birds, known for their glossy iridescent sheen, undulating flocks, and ability to imitate sounds. These birds are common and widespread across the globe. While starlings inhabit many different continents, in North America, they are considered by many to be invasive pests. Much of the ill will towards starlings comes from the fact that they are an introduced species originally from Europe. In fact, the story behind the European starling's introduction is one of the most iconic in a long history of people meddling in nature. Involving societies devoted to the importation of non-native species, misinformation about a notorious pharmacist, and even William Shakespeare, the starling's journey from beloved European species to American antagonist is one that you'll want to stay tuned for. Before getting too deep into the story of the European starling's cross-continental trip to the New World, let's take a moment to understand it as a species. The European starling is a fascinating bird with a glossy black base color, iridescent green and purple sheen, and a bright yellow bill. An interesting fact about the appearance of these birds is that when they molt, the new feathers are white-tipped, giving the starling a speckled appearance. As these feathers wear out, they lose these spots in exchange for an inky black look. Not only are these birds relatively pretty, but also quite interesting. European starlings travel in large flocks that look mesmerizing in the sky. These massive groups are called murmurations and are quite the spectacle to see. Starlings have impressive vocal abilities and imitate a wide array of sounds. They can even mimic human speech. European starlings are common in cities, agricultural areas, and other places inhabited by people. They feed on an extremely wide variety of food items, including insects, fruits, seeds, and discarded scraps, making the species highly adaptable. Now for the story of the starling's trip across the ocean and westward incursion. The fascinating thing about this story is that there are multiple versions. The most well-known goes something like this. In the 1800s, an eclectic pharmacist named Eugene Schieffelin had a mission: to introduce every bird ever mentioned in the works of William Shakespeare to the New World. This would mean somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 species would need to be let loose in America. The European starling is only mentioned once in any of Shakespeare's writings, but it still counts. To complete his life's work, Schieffelin brought starlings along with many other species of European birds to North America. On a snowy day in March, Schieffelin released starlings into Central Park, New York. From there, they proliferated and eventually spread out far and wide across the continent. While this story is certainly something, it may not entirely be accurate. For the true story of the European starling, we do have to first look at our story's hero, or perhaps villain depending on how you see it. Eugene Schieffelin did play a major role in the introduction of European starlings. However, some of the things most people believe about him may not be true at all. We do know that on March 6, 1890, Schieffelin released 30 pairs of European starlings that he brought from England into Central Park, New York. A year later, he repeated the same actions with 20 pairs. Where the questionable parts of the story come in are the motives behind the releases. There is little mention of Schieffelin's driving force behind these introductions having anything to do with William Shakespeare. He was the chairman of the American Acclimatization Society, an organization focused on bringing flora and fauna from the Old World to the New. Not only did societies such as this one import starlings, but also several other European bird species, including skylarks, song thrushes, and the infamous house sparrow. The first mention of Schieffelin being associated with Shakespeare in any way comes from an essay by Edwin Way Teale, published in 1948, that stated Schieffelin's hobby was bringing all of the birds mentioned in the works of William Shakespeare to North America. This may not be a literal statement, however, but rather a figure of speech, as this is the only time in any work of writing that any connection between Shakespeare and Schieffelin has been mentioned. Either way, this one essay propelled people for years to come to believe that the reason European starlings are in North America is all because of a Shakespeare fan. Another point to note is that Schieffelin and the American Acclimatization Society were not the first to release starlings into the New World. Records indicate European starlings were set loose in North America as early as 1872 in multiple locations in the United States. Some people believe starlings from these earlier introductions failed to gain a foothold in America, but records exist of wild European starlings being caught in Massachusetts in 1876, as well as in New Jersey in 1884. This would suggest that starlings had already begun breeding in the New World before Schieffelin ever even made it onto the scene. Nonetheless, once released into North America, European starlings quickly proliferated and became a problem for both native wildlife and humans. So what is it that European starlings do to be considered a pest? First of all, they're cavity nesters, and significantly more aggressive than many native species that seek out the same lodging, such as bluebirds. This often leads to starlings occupying cavities and evicting more peaceful residents. Additionally, starlings are extremely messy nesters, often completely trashing nest sites. Other ways starlings make a negative impact have to do with economics. These birds travel and forage in extremely large flocks that happen to be fond of the fare they can find around farms. Starlings are known to destroy crops, eating food intended for cattle, and spreading a plethora of diseases to livestock. Shockingly, it's estimated that European starlings cause over $1 billion in damage to the agricultural industry each year. Starlings also become a nuisance when they nest inside infrastructure, such as bridges and buildings. A scarier impact starlings have comes in the form of airplane collisions. Large flocks of starlings get sucked into the jet engines, causing damage to the plane and risking the lives of the passengers and crew on board. It's worth noting that there's been at least one recorded instance of starlings being the cause of a plane crash. So what's being done to alleviate the problems people and native wildlife are having with this perceived invasive pest? Right now, the measures are mostly preventative. In places where starlings cause problems such as farms and airports, scaring devices, traps, and bird nettings are all used to try and dissuade them from sticking around. On a smaller scale, removing nests from buildings, blocking openings in roofs and awnings, and shooing away flocks can deter starlings from being in the area. While European starling numbers have actually declined over the last 50 years, their populations in North America remain extremely healthy, and it certainly doesn't look like this species will be going anywhere anytime soon. Is there anything positive about having starlings alive and well in North America? They do consume some insects that may be considered pests, and they might not actually be having as big of a negative impact on North American bird species as previously thought. A 2003 study on 27 native bird species in North America found that only sapsuckers showed a decline as a direct result of starlings. Backyard birders may also appreciate their iridescent color, intellect, and personality. They also can be seen in mixed blackbird flocks, showing that they do at least play nice with some other native species. However, many people still detest starlings. At the end of the day, European starlings are here to stay, and their story is one that we can take lessons from. In their native range, starlings are beautiful and captivating to watch, but in North America, many view these birds as an unwanted nuisance. It's possible these sentiments aren't only because of what the starling does as a species, but also because in the years following their introduction, anti-immigrant rhetoric was at a high. These feelings may have passed on to the starling, which some people saw as a representation of immigration continuing in America. Either way, the starling's emergence as a successful species in a land they aren't originally from is not only a reflection of those that came to America from overseas, but also represents the lore and misinformation often accompanying the things that we know, but may not fully understand. Sure, many people detest them, but that hasn't stopped the European starling from carving out a niche in North America. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on Badgerland Birding.